Six Nations 2022 review for France. Last one of these we're going to be doing. We've looked at all the other five teams, saving the champion Grand Slam French team for last. You could say saving the best for last. Feel free to check out all the other videos. We've got some stats and kind of interesting little tidbits from their campaigns. But we're going to go over France, their results, the stats. We can probably go to the verdict right now and say, yeah, we'll give France a big old meets or exceeds expectations by getting a Grand Slam. I do feel like it was important for France to finally, because they've been threatening to do it for a couple of years, but to finally get their hands on the Six Nations trophy. And the fact that they did it with a Grand Slam is kind of that cherry on the cake. It goes from maybe meeting expectations to exceeding them, because, I mean, I do feel like they had the squad, they got the coaches, and honestly, they had one of the best fixtures lists. Of all the teams, I think they had the fixtures list to get things done, and they did. So, yeah, all credit to France on a pretty bloody good campaign. But what can we take from it? Obviously, compared to last year, where they finished second with 3 wins and 2 losses, they had 16 points, 140 points scored, 103 against. They've improved on all those factors. They've gone from second to first. They've finished with 25 points. They've finished with 168 points for, up from 140, and 73 against, down from 103. So across the board, the French result in 2022 is far and away better than the previous year. But what about the match day stats? There are actually some pretty interesting changes from the way we saw the French play in 2022 compared to last year. One of the first ones that struck me as a little bit more of a traditional one, in that France has gone from a team which seems to prefer to play without the ball at times to more of a possession team. Now, there's still a team which plays with less than 50% of possession compared to like an Ireland, who are like a full-on possession team. Like 2021, they play with 42.6% possession. 2022, it's up 5% to 47.6. So kind of, you know, more what we would say is like a standard number. Like most teams float around the low 50s, high 40s. There are some teams that really buck the trends. Like I mentioned, Ireland is a team that plays with loads of possession. Other teams like to genuinely play without the ball, like France in 2021, but that's shifted to be a little bit more standard. That also means you're doing less things like, you know, you're having to make less tackles just because you got more ball. So in terms of you guys being able to run around for 80 minutes, that's generally a good thing. But as I mentioned, there are teams who are quite happy to play without the ball and just tackle the house down. It also meant more territory, up about almost 10%, 50% in 2022, up from kind of 40.8 in 2021. So a big shift in territory, and a pretty big shift in position as well. So that's the kind of traditional stats. I never read too much into position and territory, because there's not like a guaranteed way to win. It doesn't really matter which one you have. I always give the Highlanders as an example. When they won Super Rugby years ago, they loved not having the ball. They would just kick you the ball, tackle the house down, and hit you when you made mistakes. So kind of that unstructured turnover play. But France has gone a little bit more, I guess, mainstream in 2022. But that's interestingly led to somehow less run meters. In a year when every other team has pretty much increased their run meter numbers, and part of that I think is down to the 50-22. You know, guys having to keep another guy at least in the backfield, meaning there's a little bit more space. Pretty much every team has gone up in the amount of runs and run meters. Not the French. The French are actually down from 440 to 373. So their run meters are down. But again, interestingly, they're kicking the ball a bit more. They're kicking the ball 30 times a game, up from 27.4. So not a huge difference, but more ball, less meters, more kicks. And interestingly, if you compare the French play to all the other teams in the Six Nations, apart from Italy, the French kick it more than everybody else as terms of like a percentage of what they're doing with the ball. Are they opting to kick it, run it, or pass it? They're kicking around about like at least 10% of the time in pretty much all their games. Only Italy kick more. Some teams kick more than France in our game, but across the Six Nations, I think France were averaging like 10, 12, 13 across the whole thing, whereas some teams would, 5% for one game, 10% for another. So the French were seemingly a wee bit more consistent. Interestingly as well, they've mauled it a wee bit more. So again, thinking about the whole possession thing, more kicking, a little bit, I guess maybe you want to say more conservative, using that big pack of theirs, but it's not one where you can just look at it and take it solely at face value, because their mauls are up to 5.4, up from 3.4 last year. But it seems to be very targeted. Like some teams they mauled a lot, and some teams they didn't maul much at all. They mauled 9 times against Italy. They mauled 9 times against Scotland. Maybe that's where they back their pack to really get some good meters. Against Ireland, they maul once, maybe back in their backs and other players to get the job done more than just going straight through the forwards. So yeah, there's a few little tidbits there which seem to indicate slightly more conservative or traditional play. But I mean, also clean breaks conceded is dramatically down from 6 in 2021 to 2.2 in 2022, which is crazy low. I know we think of the French team, we think about the flair, we think about Dupont doing crazy stuff, we think about Intermark back in like 2021 where he's like running out of his own end goal. We still saw that kind of crazy stuff from this French side, so I don't want to say they're not a flair side, but they're doing the really core stuff really well. Tackling percentage is up a little bit. Clean breaks conceded is down dramatically low, like very, very low. They're a very hard team to kind of cut to pieces. So as much as we see the flair stuff, they're doing the really grindy stuff well. So that seems to put their team in a really good position. They're winning more turnovers than last year. The penalties they concede is pretty similar, but generally across the board, a lot of their numbers are moving in the right direction. It's only 5 games in a Six Nations campaign, so you can't read too much into it, but certainly year on year, there have been some changes. One interesting one is that the goal kicking percentage is down. Like Jaminet was, talked up prior to the campaign by a handful of French viewers of this channel saying, he kicks at like 90+%. I think they were like 68. And I never read too much into goal kicking percentage because a lot of variables, distance and angle and wind and all that kind of stuff. But I do think they'll be a little bit disappointed with the way the goals were kicked. But pretty much everything else went pretty swimmingly. So, I'll leave you with one final stat is that, interestingly, they start the games pretty well. Barring the game against Italy, which seems to be the exception for everything in their stats, they won the first quarter of every game. So they start well. And they are able to go through the 80-man because in the entire campaign across those 5 games, they conceded a grand total of 10 points in the final quarter. So they're not a team that runs out of steam. If you looked at the England video, their final quarter, final 20 minutes is one where the kind of floodgates opened, for a variety of reasons. But France conceded a grand total of 10 points, 3 against Ireland and 7 against Scotland in the final 20 minutes of their game. So really cracking stuff from this French side. So absolutely these guys are going to be a danger going into a World Cup. I do feel like this win gives them a lot more confidence because they are a side that's finally got it done. Like a bunch of these guys are like champions at club level, be it the Champions Cup, top 14. They've won junior World Cups and whatnot, but now they've got the first Six Nations title for France in a decade, and they did it in pretty emphatic fashion. So, it's a pretty positive review for the French, not surprisingly. There's still a long time to go, between now and the World Cup. So we'll see how these guys go for the rest of this year. We'll see what kind of touring squad they put out because they tend to like to rotate things, as we saw when they toured Australia last year. And then we've still got one more Six Nations campaign to go before the World Cup. But certainly, sitting here in early 2022... France are looking like they're in a pretty good place. But you guys let me know your thoughts. What do you reckon about France and the way they were playing in 2022? And I will talk to you guys again soon. See you later.